If your agency has a high DSP turnover rate, it's costing you so much more than money. And believe me, it is costing you a lot of money. But the greater cost is the opportunities lost. In the past few years, I've seen provider after provider shut their doors. On the one hand, this is very tragic. I wouldn't say I'm particularly happy about it. However, if you're still in the game, then that spells big, huge opportunity for you to pick up more clients, to help serve more people, but only if you have enough staff. Hello, difference maker, and welcome to IDD Leader, the podcast that's all about helping IDD providers retain and grow their DSP workforce using behavioral science. I'm your host, Nate Beers, and today, well, I'm going to mix it up a little bit. I'm really going to talk to you about the problem, how much it is costing you and every IDD provider with this whole sticking point, this monkey on our backs, this problem of DSP turnover. We're going to focus on that for a good length of time in this episode. And then eventually, for the last few minutes, I won't leave you hanging with only talking about a problem. Of course, we'll talk about some solutions as well. If I were to ask you, tell me a story about how turnover has affected a client or has affected your agency, I'm sure that many stories would come to mind. One such story that you might relate to is when I met John. I was working with him as a behavior specialist, and he was an individual in his 50s who had been in a group home for, I think, only about 5 years. Before that, he lived with family. He was not interested in talking to me, not interested really in connecting with really any new individuals. I mean, any new staff members or professionals. After several months of trying, and I was, feeling a little bit, I wouldn't say frustrated with him, but just frustrated with myself. How can I not connect with this individual? I'm usually very good at connecting with people in that role. That's what the conversation I'm having with myself. Then one day, as I am trying to talk with John again, he lets me in on a little secret. He says, "You know what I've learned? Don't get attached." And he went on to share with me how when he first moved into the group home, his favorite staff person, in fact, really the only DSP that he felt comfortable with at first, that right as John was getting used to living there, boom, that worker was gone, and he left. And this must have really profoundly affected John, because from then on, he kind of made it a point to not really connect with staff or professionals that were in his life. All because of this issue of turnover. That also makes me think of Joy. She was just almost like a superwoman DSP. On one particular evening, due to multiple call-offs and difficulties with coverage, she took the individuals from the house where she was working and took them in the van over to another nearby group home house. And for the next 5 hours, she was watching all the individuals from both group homes, trying to maintain as much normalcy, even though half of them were trying to do their evening routine or nighttime routine in someone else's house, but just to keep the coverage in place because there was nobody else to fill those spots. And it was 5 hours rather till the next person could come in, and all the other workers were occupied. I mean, they were in other places also stretched very thin. If you run a day program, perhaps you relate to this example where your supervisors have been getting pulled into coverage so often that most of their supervisory duties and responsibilities start falling through the cracks and are falling behind, which then creates a domino effect up to the higher level managers. And so on and so on. And it creates really this negative cycle. Along with that, there can be such a morale crusher when good staff leave. And frankly, even sometimes when very mediocre staff leave, just because it can be so hard to keep the coverage and the ratios that are needed. All these things, such detrimental costs to high DSP turnover rates. The client outcomes and the stress increase for all the staff and for the clients. I've seen behavioral, like negative behaviors, increase massively in a home where the turnover rate was very high. And one individual in particular, not my friend John from the beginning, but a different individual, as new staff came in, this was a big trigger point for him to start engaging in more harmful behaviors. So I don't need to tell you more about how this is hurting your agency, because you would know that. And these are your stories after all. But do you know some of the financial costs? According to the University of Minnesota, it costs in the neighborhood of $5,000 per DSP replacement. That's the cost of recruitment, the cost of training, the cost of onboarding, the cost of bringing someone fully up to speed, med training, the whole 9 yards. That's not the cost of overtime when there's a staff shortage. But that is also a huge cost on many agencies due to vacancies. That is not including the cost of the burnout that can happen for those who remain, who are stretched thin and trying to keep everything covered. And it certainly doesn't capture the team's collective groan every time another DSP walks out on the job. You've probably already done the math, but at $5,000 per replacement, if you were to just calculate how many DSPs have turned over in your organization in the last year, multiply that by 5,000, that just gives you a ballpark of how many dollars that has cost your agency just within the last 12 months. And of course, a huge cost connected to the turnover rate is that overtime. For some agencies, that can be 5, 10, or more times the cost of just the onboarding, the recruitment, and the training of new staff. One other thought on this is that the issue of DSP turnover, the cost of that, is not just how many dollars are being spent. It is, I believe, perhaps the biggest cost of all is the opportunity cost. When your agency is struggling just to maintain its current group homes, its current day programming, its current vocational programs, whatever types of programs you have, when you're struggling to even just keep those staffed in a most basic way, it's really hard to focus on the opportunities that are there. But right now, from what I've been seeing, there are so many opportunities to grow. Most agencies I've talked to are consistently, if not constantly, turning people away who are seeking services. Even turning away individuals that have been funded. They've got their waiver funding in place, and yet there's just not staff to take these folks under our wings or to help serve them to live their best lives. So the cost of DSP turnover goes far beyond just the current dollars, but it is also what is not happening, the growth that's not happening, the expansion that's not happening in many, many agencies. So, what should we do about these costs? Well, to boil it down to one thing, I'd say get serious about solving the costs, which you probably already are because you're listening to this podcast. So let me give you 3 specific suggestions for where to start. Number 1, conduct an exit analysis. At its core, what this is looking at your turnover data alongside the turnover stories. Now, what do I mean by turnover stories? I mean having conversations, whether that's exit interviews, a combination really of exit interviews, stay interviews, and talking with current frontline supervisors and staff to find out what's happened with those who have left over the last 3 months or over the last 6 months. How many good staff did we lose? What did we lose them to? Why did they leave? And what are we contributing to that? And it really helps to pinpoint. An exit analysis will help you pinpoint where to put your energies on retaining your staff. A second great option is to conduct an employee experience audit. Look at every touch point. Okay, this is there's a lot of touch points, but every touch point that DSPs are having with your agency. In other words, all facets of their job. And looking at kind of end to end. What is their experience with your agency? How does it go, for example, when they're requesting time off? Are they getting their PTO? Are they able to use it as they need to? Are they so short-staffed that there's kind of this underlying message of, yeah, well, you have your vacation time, but please don't take it this week, or this weekend over here. Looking at the employee experience when it comes to your onboarding, your training. Are people being thrown into the mix before they're ready, or are they being fully trained and having a chance to job shadow for a while before they are given full-on responsibilities? Along those same lines, not every new employee needs the same onboarding experience. Certainly, components should be the same. But what I'm trying to say is individuals who have been working, DSPs who've been in the field a long time, they would just need to get kind of let loose a lot faster because they're going to be competent in all likelihood. They need to learn your agency's way of doing things, but they'll be much more readily available to be full staff coverage than someone who's brand new to the field. And then lastly, are your frontline supervisors being trained and supported on how to manage people? What does that look like? I don't mean are they just being trained on the many different facets of the field, of providing person-centered care. All of that is very good. But I mean, are they being actually trained on how to have difficult conversations with staff, on how to handle conflict between coworkers, on how to set culture, on how to make appropriate promises and follow through on time? In other words, to underpromise and overdeliver to their staff. And so many other soft skills that can make it or break it for the employee experience for the DSPs working under those frontline supervisors. And so looking at how is the training and the ongoing support and conversations that are happening about people management for your frontline supervisors. So those would be 3 places you could start right now, right here, or just pick one of them. In fact, if I were to leave you with a final action step, I would say that. Pick one. Pick one of those 3 things. Get serious. You're already serious about solving it, but get serious on one of those. Conduct an exit analysis. Look at the employee experience. Or target the frontline supervisors training and managing people. Any of those 3 are very likely to start impacting your actual retention rate. One other tool I want to share with you is I just released a top 10 questions. This is the top 10 questions to help you solve DSP turnover. And it's a free PDF download. It really gets at some of this bigger picture. Where do we even begin? What matters most? And you can download it for free at iddleader.com/top 10. That's TOPTEN, spelled out the number 10. So iddleader.com/top 10. And you can pick up your free copy there. If you've found this podcast helpful, would you consider sharing it with somebody? Just send them a link. Or another way you could share it with somebody is sharing it with a stranger by rating and reviewing it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, because that simply makes it more findable. Well, until next time, here's to you, difference maker. Keep up the amazing work.